So let me ask you something. Does it feel like your organization is just drowning in a sea of ESG acronyms and compliance demands? Look, if you're nodding along, you are not alone. But here's the thing. What if that massive compliance headache could actually become your next big competitive advantage? Well, today we're going to show you exactly how to make that flip. Let's dive in.
Wow, this quote right here, it really just hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? What was once basically a feel-good voluntary reporting exercise has become a full-blown compliance discipline. Think about that. We're not talking about a glossy page in your annual report anymore. We're talking about mandatory, high-stakes stuff with audit-level scrutiny. And yeah, real financial penalties if you get it wrong. The game has just completely changed.
All right, so here's our game plan for today. This is how we're going to get you from a state of confusion to total clarity. First up, we're going to stare this new compliance wave right in the face. Then, we'll get into the weeds on why the old ways of doing things are failing so many companies. And from there, it's all about the solution, right? We're going to talk about a strategic mapping blueprint and then how to build the ESG engine to power it all. And finally, we'll bring it home by showing you how all this effort, well, it actually translates into a serious competitive edge.
Okay, so first things first, let's really unpack this compliance wave. You got to forget everything you thought you knew about ESG being just a PR exercise. That's over. We have officially entered a new, high-stakes reality. And in this new world, data is absolutely king.
I mean, just look at this contrast. It's night and day, right? We've basically jumped from the old world of voluntary, story-based reports, those pretty glossy PDFs, into a completely new reality. One that is mandatory, driven by hard data, and has to be digitally traceable. This isn't just some small upgrade, folks. It's a total paradigm shift. It requires a whole new way of thinking and, frankly, a whole new set of tools.
And that brings us to the new gold standard, this idea of investor-grade data. So what does that actually mean? Well, think of it this way. Your ESG information now has to be just as rigorous, just as reliable, and just as auditable as your financial statements. I'm not kidding. The level of scrutiny has literally been cranked up to the same level as your balance sheet. It's that serious.
So you might be asking, who's driving all this change? Well, it's a huge global push. You've got major players setting the tone. In Europe, for example, you have the big one, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, or CSRD for short. Then, on a global scale, there's the International Sustainability Standards Board, the ISSB. And it's not just them. Even stock exchanges are getting in on the action, setting their own rules. Put it all together, and what you have is a new, non-negotiable baseline for compliance pretty much everywhere.
Okay, so with all these new rules coming down the pipe, it becomes painfully clear that the old ways of managing ESG are they're broken. They don't work anymore. And sticking with them, it's not just inefficient, it's actively costing your business. Big time.
So that leads to the million-dollar question, right? It's probably one you're asking yourself right now. In this new environment, where are companies going so wrong?
The single biggest mistake we see time and time again is companies trying to tackle this one regulation at a time. It kind of feels logical on the surface, right? But trust me, it's a trap. This super reactive approach, it just creates silos everywhere. It leads to a mountain of duplicated work, and you end up with inconsistent data across all your different reports. It's not just inefficient, it's incredibly risky.
And this right here, this illustrates the core structural problem perfectly. We call it the missing middle. Think about it. Most companies have really clear policies and governance up at the top, and they have hardworking reporting teams down at the bottom. The problem, the breakdown, happens in this giant operational gap right in between them. This is where high-level policies fail to turn into actual daily practice and where all that critical data just gets lost. It's never even captured.
All right, enough doom and gloom about the problem. Let's start talking about the solution. This is where we get to introduce the strategic mapping blueprint. This is the absolute key to turning all those dense external regulations into concrete internal actions your teams can actually follow.
So, what is this blueprint? At its core, the solution is really all about translation. It's about building a bridge. Picture this. On one side of the river, you have the super dense, complex language of all these regulations. And on the other side, you have the everyday language of your business, your processes, your operations, who's accountable for what. The map, well, that's the bridge that connects the two.
So how do you actually build this bridge? Well, it's a pretty systematic three-layer process. It's not magic. Step 1, you determine exactly which disclosures and which metrics actually apply to your business. Step 2, you identify who inside your organization is the owner of that information. And Step 3, you take a hard look at the data you already have and, more importantly, where your gaps are.
See? It's a clear, actionable plan.
Okay, let's look at those two big frameworks again as an example, CSRD and ISSB. They seem different, right? The CSRD is all about broad transparency for all stakeholders, employees, customers, everyone. The ISSB, on the other hand, is laser-focused on enterprise value and financial risk specifically for investors. So they have different goals, different audiences. But here's the key insight. A single, intelligently designed system can and should produce the underlying data for both. This saves you from the nightmare of running two separate, very expensive projects.
So once you've got your map laid out, it's time to build the engine that's going to make it all go. This phase is all about taking that strategy off of a piece of paper or a PowerPoint slide and embedding it directly into the daily operational DNA of your company.
And this requires a really crucial mindset shift. ESG is a team sport. It is not a solo mission for the sustainability department to figure out on their own. It has to be woven into the very fabric of the organization. That means teams like procurement, finance, operations, HR, IT, even internal audit. They all have a critical role to play in generating and then validating all this data.
A really fantastic example of what this integration looks like in action is something called the carbon trail methodology. So instead of doing a big, painful carbon report once a year, this approach weaves emissions data directly into the transactional fabric of the business, into every transaction, every decision. What this does is it transforms carbon accounting from this backward-looking historical exercise into a real-time, forward-looking tool that helps you make smarter choices every single day.
And all of this hard work, this brings us to the ultimate payoff. Because when you build this engine the right way, ESG finally makes that transformation from a frustrating compliance burden into a genuinely powerful source of competitive advantage.
Honestly, if you remember one thing from this whole explainer, let it be this. The future of ESG is not about reporting, it's about operational transformation. It's about using the demands of reporting as the catalyst to fundamentally make your operations better, smarter, and more resilient.
And just look at the tangible payoffs here. Yeah, of course you avoid the penalties, and that's great. But the real prize is gaining much better access to investors, being able to secure lower costs of capital, and building a supply chain that is way more resilient to shocks. This whole approach literally turns a cost center into a powerful value creation engine for the business.
This really shows the whole evolutionary journey, doesn't it? We came from a past of static, backward-looking reports. The standard for today is having real-time dashboards, but the future, and I mean the future that leading companies are already building today, is all about predictive analytics and really cool new concepts like digital product passports, which are going to require complete traceability across a product's entire life cycle.
So we'll leave you with this final thought. The regulatory frameworks, they're going to keep evolving. That is the one thing you can absolutely guarantee. So the real question you need to be asking isn't, are we compliant today? The real question is, have we built an operating model that is agile and ready for tomorrow? Because the future really does belong to those who are. Thanks so much for joining us.